When most people think hip hop origins, they think the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens, but Long Island, that's a bold thesis. So for your film, The Sixth Borough and such, we're talking about The Sixth Borough, a film that reveals how Long Island became an unexpected crucible for hip hop excellence, featuring legends like De La Soul, Public Enemy, EPMD, Rakim, and Method Man. So what made you realize this story needed to be told in particular?
Well, I was fortunate enough to be brought onto the project by the executive producers, Julian and Andrew. Julian and Andrew are both Long Island natives, and they're really, really passionate about everything Long Island is, including, the hip hop scene. So they thought that Long Island hip hop was really undervalued. So they wanted to create a film giving Long Island its, proper credit, proper due. So they created a sizzle reel, they did some interviews, and then fast forward, about, I would say, a couple of months, maybe a year later, they interviewed me to bring me on board. And as a big hip hop fan, a lot of my favorite rap artists are from Long Island. So I just jumped at the opportunity to help tell the story, to help tell the story of this borough that hasn't got its proper due. So because I love these artists so much, I was just happy to do it.
You got an incredible lineup of hip hop royalty in this film. What is it like getting Chuck D, Rakim, and these legends to open up about their Long Island experience?
I mean, Clay, it was literally a dream come true. De La Soul is one of my favorite rap groups of all time. Public Enemy is probably one of the most influential political groups to me of all time. So to be able to meet these guys, to meet Parrish, to meet Method Man, I mean, if you had told me this when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, I wouldn't have believed you, right? It's it is a dream. And, you have to kind of balance. It's tricky. You have to balance being a fan and not fanning out when you're interviewing these guys and maintaining some sort of professionalism. And, I try to do that. And then after the interview, I asked them a couple other questions before the interview. So it was amazing. It was literally a dream come true.
And I'm from Long Island originally, from Freeport.
Okay, that's where my wife's from, Freeport.
Okay. So it's not too often I get in spaces where people know exactly what I'm talking about, unless you're from, New York, generally, right. More specifically. But you compare Long Island's hip hop scene to Harlem's jazz renaissance and Seattle's grunge explosion. That's a pretty powerful historical parallel. What makes a place become a cultural epicenter like that, in your opinion?
It's interesting. I mean, it's just this really interesting mix of just a time when this varied, number of extremely talented people just come together at these really crucial points in history, in world history. So when you think about the Harlem Renaissance, when you think about what's happening in Paris, when you think about what's happening in Seattle, right? You just have these little moments and pockets. And that late 70s and early 80s period into the early to mid 90s of Long Island was another one of those periods. And I think it's, what I think it is that, you have this really interesting migration of all these working class Black folk coming from the other boroughs, right? And trying to find a better life. And there's just enough, financial uplift. There's just enough economic change where they can afford these houses on Long Island. And they aren't the biggest houses, right? But they're houses and they have yards. And because this is happening, right, this is exposing a whole new generation of Black and brown folk to all these different, influences, experiences, cultures, right? And it all, mixes into this really interesting gumbo, this really interesting stew of this music, right? Then you also have, while all this migration is happening, right? In the Bronx, you got, Kool Herc and all those guys creating hip hop. So it's all this stuff happening, all at one time and one point to create, this great Long Island hip hop sound.
So the film explores this fascinating cultural collision: Black families seeking the American dream in suburbia but facing fierce racism, which I definitely know about, like what happened in Lawrence and such. We do have to trace back one of the original suburbs after the Second World War was Levittown, New York, which is in Long Island, I believe. So how did this tension actually fuel the creativity we hear in the music?
I mean, it's because you have people experiencing white flight, right? So we have Bill Stephanie really talking about that. When he first gets to this town, the neighborhood is predominantly white. Fast forward a few years later, it's predominantly black. What does that mean culturally, right? What is again, when I talked about influences earlier, what's being brought in? What are the cultural traditions being brought in, right? What's leaving, right? So that influences the music. And even though there's white flight, there's still this really interesting intermingling, right, with kids from all different cultures in the schools of Long Island, right? I'm sure you experienced that in Freeport, right? So it's not just the hip hop influence coming from the Bronx. It's not just the R&B influence coming from the other boroughs, not just the reggae. It's now we have a rock influence, right? Now we have a Jewish music influence. They talk about doing the bar, DJ bar mitzvahs, Public Enemy's crew, early on. So it's all these different cultural influences, again, as I said, just mixed in. So that's how, and it gives the music a really specific sound, right? The EPMD sound is a sound that was totally new and wasn't duplicated. Public Enemy sound was completely new. De La Soul sound, completely new, right? And this, I think, is because they're, Long Island being the sixth borough, is you're getting all these other things hitting you, right? All these other influences hitting you, and then not just musically, just culturally, and it's all being put into the music and making that music sound super, super unique.
I'm one who studies social dynamics and have for a long time. I'm always intrigued by how these artists adapted an urban sound to suburban surroundings. Can you break down what that actually sounded like and how it shifted the genre? If you could just perform a deeper dive into that.
Yeah, I mean, the urban sound, I think, I would guess that the urban sound is what they're transplanting from. Let's just say the Bronx. I mean, it could be any other boroughs, right? So that's what they're getting from the Bronx, because just because they're migrating to Long Island, right, doesn't mean they don't have family in the other boroughs. I'm from Westchester, but I still have family, predominantly in the Bronx and Harlem. So you always go back to the Bronx and Harlem, right? And there would be that difference, right? You have the suburban life in Westchester, Mount Vernon, and then you go back to the projects in the Bronx and Harlem. And that gives you, to me, I sort of enjoyed it, but sort of did not enjoy it, but it always kept you grounded. That's why my parents did it, right? And that gave you that kind of, if you will, urban feel to who you are, your personality, because you realize this is where I really come from. This is where my people are at. And I think, again, musically, that's where that urban sound sort of comes from, right? This is where I come from, right? This is what the people from where I'm, from where I'm from, this is the music that they're creating. Now let me bring that with me. And then, as we point out in the film, they're bringing that with them through just the early mixtapes from Cold Crush Brothers, Grandmaster Flash, etc. Right? Let me bring that urban sound with me through the mixtapes and seeing what they're doing. Now let's bring that to Long Island. And now that we have that as our foundation and our basis, now let's add these different layers to that. And I think that's what's happening. And so your early question about the racism, I mean, I to me, within the music, Public Enemy was, to me, the group that really infused that kind of aspect of the Long Island experience as well, right? As they talked about, the police, they talked about just the general racism of America affecting their daily lives. Not so much daily life. You hear bits and pieces, but to me, it's really Public Enemy. But that's to me. So that's where the urban feeling and that really hip hop feeling comes in.
Appreciate that for sure. Because Long Island does need to have a story told more. I certainly feel. But for our audiences, many of whom moved from urban areas seeking better opportunities for their families, what do you think the story reveals about the complexities of that American dream pursuit still today in 2025?
I mean, it's affordability first. It's redlining. It's housing segregation. I mean, these issues haven't gone away, Clay. I mean, one of the most interesting things I learned while working on this film was that even though people were able to migrate to Long Island, they were still pushed into certain towns, right? And what Chuck D called them were the black belts of Long Island. And he does it better. He can do it really better in the film. He does it really well in the film. But there's certain towns, and he said this line, this town, this town, this town. Freeport being one of those towns where Black people were pushed to, right?
Yeah.
And I say that's still happening to this day, right? Where you just build luxury housing and you price people out of different neighborhoods throughout. So that's always something to be aware of as we're trying to, create better opportunities for our families. It's, what's around us, right? When we move into these communities, what are the resources that can help us specifically? If they aren't there, okay, how do we change that? How do we create change, in these places, if that's even possible? Do we want to go through all that? So it's a lot. I mean, America is always a funny and interesting place to live. And there's always some sort of challenge that can always be, related back to its foundation. So
Appreciate that for sure. So, Jason, what do you want people to understand about Long Island's place in hip hop history after they see this film? Just going forward, as far as its place, because we recently celebrated 50 years of hip hop. We heard obviously New York City holds a great place, and LA does, Atlanta does, and everything like that. But we don't hear about Long Island, and I never even thought about it because I always really just extended New York City into Long Island when you're having those grander conversations. So what are you hoping that just going forward about
it's easy. Just have another appreciation for the artist. Go back. I would encourage audiences after they see the film, go back and listen to the artist, listen to their catalog, and not just the artist in the film. We have K Solo, we have Keith Murray, we got Das. No, is it Das Effect? I'm not sure if it's Das Effect. There's a Craig Mack, Granddaddy IU. There's a ton of other artists, from Long Island. Busta Rhymes, Lisa New School, and I would just explore the music. I mean, there's some artists now, Rock Marciano, who's from Long Island now. Just explore the music, have fun with it. Really, I would say revisit some of these classic guys, these classic groups, listen to their new stuff. But just give Long Island its proper due in the hip hop scene. That is the thing I want people to take away from it.
Appreciate that. Well, we're definitely glad to be having the 6th Borough screening at Martha Street African American Film Festival and all. And thank you again, Jason, for your time today. And will you be on the island?
I will not, unfortunately. I'm on vacation with my family. I was there last year with a film, Old Dirty Bastard, A Tale of Two Dirties. Had a really, really good time there. I wish I was there this summer, but maybe next year.
All right. Well, thank you again for your time, and you have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, Clay.
Bye-bye.